I gotta be totally honest with you guys, I did not expect this game to be any good with all the hype they built up for it. With that demo that generated almost as much infamy as the PT demo. Everyone scrambling through the demo trying to find every little secret to find all the details they can about the full game. And of course, no game ever lives up to the hype, but especially lately, we've seen a dirty trend on the part of developers where they just overhype a game and then it turns out to be total shit when it's launched. So the developers are actually spending more time hyping up the game so that you'll buy it instead of actually making the game good. Now, like I said, let's just get this out of the way. No game ever lives up to the hype. And it's a sad day where hype trains like this actually make me less excited for a game. But Resident Evil 7 actually comes pretty close, and it's a damn good game. As afraid as I was from the hype train, I took the developer's word on it that it was still gonna be a Resident Evil title and feel like a Resident Evil title, so I bought it. And I'm really glad I did. First of all, the graphics you see in the trailers and demos are no exaggeration. This game looks absolutely incredible, not just with its photorealistic environments, characters, and fluid animation, but also a super sophisticated dynamic lighting system, super meticulously crafted environments where every detail is considered down to things under the sofa or behind shelves. And with all this attention to detail, it just makes the environments look even more real and believable. No wide open space is too featureless to tread into that uncanny valley. And no detail is too over-designed to be believable. And that's something that a lot of other games fail to do. Sure, they've been able to make an environment look nice, but they never are able to make it look real. Like all of these horrible things are happening in a real place. And even with all this detail in the highly localized setting of the game, doing my best to avoid spoilers, they do a very good job of keeping the settings varied as you progress further and further. And this detail doesn't only apply to the environments or character designs. A lot of smaller effects that would probably have gone left out in other games are present here, like the blood and guts of your enemies or yourself remaining on your weapons or your arms after a close encounter. Secondly, addressing one of the things that hardcore Resident Evil fans were most afraid of when they saw or played the demo, is that it gave off a vibe that felt a lot like the PT demo we had a while back. Which is cool, but not Resident Evil. So if you're one of those people, put your fears to rest, because this is through and through a Resident Evil game. From the gunplay, which forces you to make every shot count, and search everywhere scavenging for ammo when you're not fighting, to the bizarre puzzles throughout the game with hidden clues to help you figure them out, the tight inventory management that sometimes feels like a puzzle in and of itself, a save system incorporating elements both old and new, with tape recorders replacing the role of typewriters, serving as your manual save stations, but also a few checkpoints only where necessary though, not enough to cheapen the consequences of dying, which is likely to happen a lot more than in previous games. And speaking of dying, the insane brutality we've come to expect in the franchise is still intact. Not only intact, but it's even stepped up a lot from previous titles. The insanely graphic death sequences are enough to satisfy the morbid curiosity of even the most fucked up people. So it goes without saying that this game is not for the faint of heart. They're definitely going back to Resident Evil's roots with this game, with the real horror experience. Not just in the disgustingly satisfying brutality, but also with the way they handled the enemies. The primary antagonists of the game will terrorize you throughout most of your playthrough, and they cannot die. The best you can do against them in combat is load half your ammo into them to knock them out temporarily. But if you do, you can be sure that you'll see more of them until you get to their final boss fight. This constant presence of the enemies leaves you with a constant lingering fear throughout your playthrough. And much to my surprise personally, the unlockable extras you get from beating the game in certain ways that we had in Resident Evil 4 makes a comeback here in Resident Evil 7. Like a special pistol you get for beating the game on any difficulty, or the badass circular saw you get from beating the game within a certain time limit, or even infinite ammo mode, which you get for beating the game on the hardest difficulty, rewarding you with your hard-fought victory by allowing you to run through the game guns blazing with the most powerful weapons. It serves as a sweet catharsis after having had to scavenge every single bullet before. Unlocking and messing around with all these unlockables adds a lot of replayability to the game. And another fear people had was how well the franchise would translate into the new first-person camera angle. And now bearing in mind this isn't the first time the franchise has changed camera angles on us, while I prefer the third-person angles that Resident Evil 4 introduced, just personally as a preference in games in general, not only does this do a great job of translating Resident Evil into a first-person angle, but it actually pulls off the first-person experience better than a lot of games that have been running in first-person for a while now. They really take advantage of it, trying so hard to push the limits of your comfort zone. Having the villains take every opportunity they can get to get in your face is truly terrifying, and these villain characters are incredibly well done, which is atypical to the Resident Evil franchise. Now while they don't really hold up to my all-time favorite villain, Voss from Far Cry 3, they each deliver a very similar brand of insanity that fits perfectly with a horror game.
I know. Fucking password, right? Why don't you try 0814? No! 0621. No, it's 0514. Oh, come on. Take a chance. You never know.
Not to knock the classic badass villains like Albert Wesker, but you gotta admit they're all pretty much cheesy comic book villains. And on top of having all these great villains, the story as a whole is superb. Now while I admit the ending is a bit more geared towards fans of the series, for the most part it is a standalone story separate from the previous games without throwing out the established lore behind them. And all the way till the end you'll be making guesses and trying to put the pieces together to figure out what's happening here, who's responsible and what started it, only to connect all the little pieces at the end perfectly. But then you have even more questions afterward about new topics, which makes you actually excited for the game since they tease free DLC coming soon. Now if this becomes a regular thing with episodic content being released for free every once in a while, this would be a ginormous hit, even more so than the game is now. The optional collectibles in this game are a perfect example of how you should do collectibles in a game. Destroying all the bobbleheads hidden throughout the game will unlock you special things to use in future playthroughs. And there's plenty of text collectibles for you to read, but they aren't too long or too frequent for you to want to read them. I'm looking at you, Dishonored. And it isn't just a lack of information overload that makes them well done, but they also sometimes have clues for some of the puzzles in them, which can also be found in the videotape collectibles, which you find around the house and you have to play from a VHS player, and serves as kind of an interactive cutscene introducing you to the mechanics to the puzzles. The close-up item examination is also a nice touch, and it forces you to really pay attention and look around in your environment. And lastly, with everything else the game has to offer, it's a real surprise that they also offer full VR support. Now I'm just too poor to afford my own VR headset, so I couldn't try this for myself, but I can only imagine how many pairs of pants I'd be ruining if I had to play this in VR. Now it's kind of hard to find negatives about this game that don't have their own redeeming qualities. For example, while the enemies are well done, the heroes are extremely bland and forgettable, which is forgiven by their limited presence in the game and the fact that the enemies are so well done. But it is kind of disappointing how flat and forgettable the main character that you play as is.
You're not listening to me. There are crazy people in this house trying to fucking kill me.
Well, all right. Let me tell you this. You don't exactly seem like you playing with a full deck yourself, all right?
Are you kidding me?
Look, like I said, we've had several missing persons calls. And I can't rule out that an outsider like yourself may not be involved.
All right. I'll tell you whatever you want.
All right. Now that's more like it. Now, meet me in the garage. We'll talk there.
Hey, wait. You gotta give me your gun.
Co-op mode from the previous two games is gone, as well as the survival style mercenaries mode, but with the new horror setting, co-op would have been out of place anyways, and supposedly there is a survival mode coming in the future as an update, and hopefully this is going to be a free update because I'll be a little pissed off if it's a paid DLC. But the game holds up on its own without a survival mode, so I won't be too pissed off. And there are one or two lame or predictable scares throughout the game, but with how often the game makes you shit your pants in other moments outside of these, that's all forgiven in my eyes. It's just a little unfortunate that this has to become a little more common in the final act of the game, where it all becomes a lot more linear, where the setting for the final act would make sense for a maze of winding passages, and they focus more on building up the story than making it seem scary. And since it is a good story, I forgive them for this. However, since the game seems to follow this pattern as you get further and further of taking more and more choice and control away from your character, it all culminates in a rather disappointing, lackluster boss fight that's little more than a glorified QuickTime event. All control of your character's movement is taken away during the fight, and they even point you at the boss's weak spots so you don't have to aim. Granted, it is a well choreographed scene, and it would have been badass if this was a movie, but in the future Capcom has to remember that this is a game, not a movie. We need to be required to move around and dodge the enemy's attacks and have to aim for their weak spots ourselves. And speaking of the game's finale, the game just ends way too soon. While your very first playthrough without walkthroughs might take you 10 to 15 hours, which is already pretty short, considering the game only has a single player campaign. Once you know all the solutions to all the puzzles and where to go for everything, the game suddenly has a playtime of 4 to 6 hours. And considering there's even an achievement for beating the game in under 4 hours, this means that Capcom knew the game was this short when they released it. But honestly, this kind of reinforces my theory that this is going to be an episodic kind of thing, and that there will be more free content aside from the Not a Hero one that they advertise at the end of the credits. Like I mentioned before, the sort of PT elements that we saw in the demo are kind of gone now. Now, for the most part, I think this is a good thing as it allows the game to be more like Resident Evil than Silent Hills. But there are some aspects of the demo I do wish they had stuck to in the full game. For example, the videotapes, aside from the one in the very beginning where you can use the lockpick to unlock the drawer, don't have that same environment altering effect like they did in the very first tape. And furthermore, there's no optional story-based items you can find if you look carefully enough. I thought it was really cool how in the demo you had to actually look around and unravel the mysteries of the house, and that was the only way to get the true ending to the demo. I wish they had a similar thing in the main game, where if you managed to figure out the plot early you could get the true better ending. And lastly, the variety of weapons available in the game falls a little short. Whereas in previous games, each ammo type had a variety of weapons to use with it. And while there are quite a few different handguns you can use, it really drops off after that with only one machine gun you can use, one grenade launcher, one flamethrower, one magnum, and only 2 shotguns. However, the advertisement for the free DLC at the end of the credits shows a main character wielding a completely different machine gun than what's available in the game. So my hope is that this DLC will introduce more weapon varieties, and if my theory is correct, future episodes beyond this will introduce even more. Like I've mentioned before, this game does so much right that it's hard to find complaints with the game or things that I would like to change. Although without using any footage or saying any spoilers, there is a choice you make near the end of the game that pretty much pigeonholes you into either ending A or ending B, good ending or bad ending, when instead it would make a lot more sense if this choice just led you to a different path towards the same ending. And if the ending you got was instead dependent on the items you found throughout the playthrough and whether or not you unraveled the mysteries of the house, like I said earlier, like in the demo. I also would have liked it if weapon upgrades had made a return like they appeared in Resident Evil 4. I liked how if you found a gun you really liked, you could choose to upgrade it so that if you stick with it for the whole playthrough, you'll get more benefit out of it. And lastly, I found the flamethrower in the game to be rather shitty, honestly. Outside of helping clear some environmental hazards in the level you find it in, the flamethrower kinda just turns into a 2 inventory slot paperweight after that, with effectiveness that's only barely on par with the handgun using basic ammo, except taking up 2 inventory slots as well. I guess what I'm saying is the flamethrower either needs to be made more effective or only take up 1 inventory slot. And with that, I have enough information to come to my final verdict. And I'm gonna have to give 2 scores for this one. The first one for if my theory turns out to be true and we end up with episodic downloadable content for free later on, and if this content is just as good as the primary game. And another for if the episodic content turns out to be shit, or if this one free bonus episode ends up being all we get and is even shorter than the main game. So if this does turn out to be an episodic series, I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. But if it's not, I'm gonna have to bump it down to an 8 out of 10. But I'm confident that this will be an episodic thing, and even if it isn't, I'll still have walked away from the whole experience glad I bought and played the game all the way through. I'm really looking forward to seeing more from this game, and until then, I'll see you guys next time. Oh shit.
Ah, shit! That's all, Ethan.
Fuck!
Let's finish this, you and I. Oh, yeah. I'm gonna take you for a ride.
No, 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 no!